Hi everyone, I'm Maria McLachlan and may I wish you a very happy, boring as people day. Sorry, I mean a happy non-binary day today. In fact, this whole week is dedicated to raising non-binary awareness, so obviously I want to play my part in that noble cause. For those of you who think non-binary is just another load of gender bollocks, you need to know that International Non-Binary Day has been celebrated every single year since 2012, and that's almost ancient history in terms of gender bollocks. I'm pretty sure I didn't know back then that I was non-binary, but then I didn't even know who I was back then, and I have the right to ask myself who I am and become who I am. And today, who I am is non-binary. Yesterday's history, tomorrow's a mystery, as other people in my gender fluid family would probably say. Obviously, as a non-binary person, my uniqueness, my individuality will tell you that my pronouns are Muppet and Plonker. By the way, the fact that Non-Binary Day falls on the same day as Bastille Day is coincidental. The date was chosen because it is halfway between International Women's Day and International Men's Day. Get it? I don't know whose idea it was or where they live. Okay. How better to celebrate Non-Binary Day than to do something totally boring, because aren't we all bored to death of non-binary nonsense? Somebody provided me with a couple of titles of allegedly serious articles about being non-binary, so I checked them out. First, Psychology and Neuroscience Beyond the Binary by yet another Cambridge PhD student. Is there something in the water up there that's sending them all doolally? This one's name is Giulia Barsuola, and the article is on the Science for the People website. That's not a website I trust because it is unashamedly politically motivated, but then I don't trust any science websites or journals these days. Question everything said by anyone pushing this claptrap. Sorry, I mean this serious and liberating philosophy. I'll talk through a couple of paragraphs. It starts. Biological essentialism and reductionism have plagued how we scientists do science and how society looks at the science we do for a very long time. Well, scientists, as individual human beings, are no more immune to biological essentialist or any other rubbish ideas than anyone else. But without making any attempt to substantiate the claim that these have plagued how scientists do science, carry out scientific research, I'm inclined to take that claim with a pinch of salt. It's a shame because if Giulia had tried to make a case, tried to explain to us with examples of how scientific research is plagued by biological essentialism and reductionism, it could have been really interesting. But then that wouldn't be in keeping with being non-binary, which is spectacularly uninteresting. Biological essentialism refers to the idea that who we are is purely innate, a hardwired essence, rather than the result of myriad factors, including culture and upbringing. That seems to me to be a misleading definition of biological essentialism. It's what happens when you take a perfectly serviceable definition, one that's easy to understand, and you dunk it into the murky waters of gender identity ideology. Biological essentialism isn't about who we are. Clearly, this is something that those enthralled to that ideology will find it hard to get their heads around because they think everything is about who one is. They are obsessed with identity. But biological essentialism has historically been most commonly used to refer to the idea that certain personal qualities, or lack thereof, depends on one's sex. I talked about this in one of my early videos in which I mentioned that biological essentialist arguments were used against those fighting for female suffrage. Many of their opponents argued that women simply didn't have the ability to understand politics, and those who demanded the vote were bad women and failures at womanhood. They couldn't even be trusted to go out to vote without setting the house they've neglected on fire. That is biological essentialism. Okay, so 2 sentences in, I'm already hearing alarm bells. Here is the 3rd sentence. The closely related approach of biological reductionism tries to explain social and cultural phenomena solely in terms of biology. That's fair enough. I understand biological reductionism to be a denial of social and cultural influences on behaviour and attributing everything to hormones and brain activity. That's pretty silly because obviously people are very much influenced by the culture they live in and what is socially acceptable over time. And as that changes over time, so do many people's attitudes and behaviours. And a rather narrowly defined version of biology at that. Isn't biology the study of living organisms? That sounds pretty wide-ranging to me. And I'm wondering what she means by this. What is this narrowly defined version of biology that has people attributing all behaviours to it? We're not told. And I suspect this is something Julia can't substantiate. Rather, I think she is planting seeds in the minds of her gullible readers, the ones who are reading in the hope of finding confirmation of what they want to believe. Well, she's a scientist and she says there is a narrowly defined version of biology, so it must be true. These are the people who say, when you say woman is an adult human female, they'll go, well, obviously you've done no biology since kindergarten. They are brainwashed ignoramuses. As somebody who has been immersed in the humanities for a long time, I do not have much sympathy for either of these 2 concepts. I don't know why she's talking as if immersion in the humanities makes her better positioned to judge pseudo-scientific claims than anyone else. Science can and should do better than to rely on essentialist ideologies. You haven't shown that science, whatever you mean by that, relies on essentialist ideologies, whatever you mean by that. As a non-binary, queer, pansexual, cognitive neuroscientist, I am passionate about LGBTQ+ and mental health activism and the intersection of the 2. Okay, thank you for confessing your bias here. As someone who claims to be non-binary, you obviously consider being non-binary to be a real status that is distinct from being a man or a woman, which means you are not exactly objective. But in any event, I'd still like to ask you why you think this. Why are you non-binary? Are you able to give an answer that doesn't involve old-fashioned stereotypes and attributing those to men and women respectively? Because that, in my opinion, is at the heart of what it means to be non-binary. You don't feel you fit all the cultural expressions of what it means to be a man or a woman, and you still want a label that makes you feel special. Am I right? I believe that people have the right to ask themselves who they are. Yes, of course you do, dear. Nobody is denying you the right to obsess over yourself, to become what they are. What does this mean? Because in plain English, it doesn't make sense. You are already who you are, and the imprecise language here is typical of woke speak. Okay, it's not uncommon colloquially to talk of who someone is when you actually mean what they are like as a person. If I say I would never kick one of my cats no matter how annoying it's being because that's just not who I am, you'd know what I'm talking about. But becoming who you are means something different. It's a step further. As she's talking about gender, it sounds like she's saying, if, for example, you are female and are not comfortable with that and you think you would be happier being male or neither male nor female, then you have the right to claim to be either male or non-binary, to perform your idea of what being male or being non-binary means, and to be taken seriously. Well, I don't believe that. Obviously, you can claim to be anything you like and people can humour you if they choose to, but if they don't, then hard cheese. Get over it. And to be welcomed and respected by others around them. How I wish we all agreed on this. Colour me sceptical. In my experience, gender ideologues demand respect, but only give it to those who agree with them, and the rest of Julia's article would seem to confirm this. I'm not going to read it all, but I'll just highlight one bit of it. When I log on to Twitter, each day I encounter ever new hate trends spread by a group of trans-exclusive people. Far too many. Trans-exclusive means dedicated to spreading a message of hate and exclusion against transgender and non-binary people. Oh, that's awful. Are they the kind of people I highlight on my website on the page called Real Transphobes? The ones I never see any trans ideologues challenging, because trans ideologues are more interested in hating on those who are standing up to them and are too busy posting stuff like this about us. Subgroups of second-wave feminism are particularly hostile towards transgender people. They oppose transgender rights, deny that trans women are women, and block trans women from accessing women's spaces. Well, we'd certainly like to, because they are men and they don't belong in our spaces. Ironically, these people call themselves radical when nothing is radical about hate, and feminists when nothing is feminist about exclusion. I'm sorry, but pointing out that adult human males are men regardless of what they identify as, and that we feel uncomfortable and unsafe sharing changing rooms with them is hate? How exactly? It looks to me as if hating is what you're doing by completely disregarding what so many women quite justifiably feel and trying to frame that as hate because you have no counter argument. As for feminism not being about exclusion, well, what a ridiculous thing to say. Feminism is about women, so of course it excludes men. It's not a movement for the liberation of men. All movements exclude someone. Can you imagine if the American Civil Rights Movement said, of course, anyone who identifies as black is black, even if their European heritage goes back centuries. And of course, they should win scholarships and be appointed or elected to posts that are intended for African Americans. Anyone who disagrees with that is a hateful bigot. You are dismissing well-founded arguments as hate instead of engaging with them, and that is a big clue that you are too deeply immersed in cult thinking to be capable of understanding or of empathy for people outside your bubble. And I won't waste any more time on you, Julia. Have a nice life, and I hope you wake up and smell the coffee sooner rather than later. Next. So the other paper my commenter referred to, he didn't actually give the title of. He just said, Google, do non-binary people exist? And the first article that comes up is in the New England Medical Journal written by 4 medics. What a strange search term. Do non-binary people exist? Well, of course there are people who call themselves non-binary, just as there are people who call themselves otherkin, meaning they identify as not entirely human. That is their choice, but non-binary has no meaning outside of gender ideology. It's not a medical condition like having a difference of sexual development. Anyway, I think this is the paper he wanted me to see. Persons of non-binary gender, awareness, visibility and health disparities, which is indeed written by 4 medical doctors. I read all of it, it's not very long, and frankly it isn't worth the candle, except as an example of how even doctors are captured by this nonsense. Basically, it's about how to humour people who call themselves non-binary and keep a straight face. There is a very simple solution to much of the prejudice and discrimination that are alleged to be faced by non-binary people in the US, and that is, stop claiming to be non-binary. It's meaningless. If you are gender non-conforming and facing prejudice for being non-conforming, then fight for your right to be non-conforming. I will support you 100%. But claiming your gender identity is more important than your sex when we live in a world where people of one sex still oppress people of the other sex, nah. I don't respect that, and I urge you to find a better way of making yourself feel special and maybe less boring at the same time. If, in spite of yourself, you are still interested in this staggeringly boring issue, I recommend Rose of Dawn's video entitled "Non-Binary is Meaningless." Thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.